Right, so we're going to start a new chapter book today. It is called Flat Stanley. Now, we're not going to read all of this because there are actually 6 books in here, because there's a series of books about Flat Stanley, which I actually didn't know, because I've chosen this one because, again, when I was little and I was reading books by myself, Flat Stanley was a book that I found funny at the beginning because of what happens to him. So, shall we have a look at the front cover? And I want you to have a think, what could Flat Stanley be about? So what could you predict? So the title, if you get rid of those 2 words, it will be Flat Stanley. And there is a picture of him. Flat Stanley. So what did you think? How did he get flat? Alright, shall we have a look? So here are 2 characters for you to see. We've got Mum and we've got Dad. Mr. and Mrs. Landtrop, that's their names. And they are, what are they getting ready, do you think? Yeah, they're preparing breakfast. Now this first chapter is quite a short one, but it's an important part of the story. It's called The Big Bulletin Board. Let's find out what a big bulletin board is. Breakfast was ready. "I will go and wake the boys," Mrs. Landtrop said to her husband, George Landtrop. Just then, their younger son, Arthur, called from the bedroom he shared with his brother Stanley. "Hey, come and look! Hey!" Mr. and Mrs. Landtrop were both very much in favour of politeness and careful speech. "Hay is for horses, Arthur, not people," Mr. Landtrop said as they entered the bedroom. "Try to remember that." "Excuse me," Arthur said, "but look." Uh-oh, what do you think's happened? He pointed to Stanley's bed, and across it lay an enormous bulletin board. Now that's like, like in the classroom where we've got like one of those display boards and you can pin things into it. It's one of those in his bedroom. And it was across, oh my gosh, his bed. So what do you think might have happened? Now, Mr. Landtrop had given the boys this for Christmas so that they could pin up pictures and messages and maps. It had fallen during the night on top of Stanley. But Stanley was not hurt. Oh, phew, that's lucky, isn't it? In fact, he would still have been sleeping if he had not been woken up by his brother's shout. "What's going on here?" he called out carefully and cheerfully from beneath the enormous board. Mr. and Mrs. Landtrop hurried to lift it from the bed. All right, let's have a look what they found. There they are, they're lifting it up. It's the board. And there is Stanley, sat up in bed. You notice anything? Look at the faces of Mum and Dad. They must have been, how do you think they were feeling at first? You'd have been worried, wouldn't you, if you had something falling on top of you? And maybe they were a bit shocked now of what they have found. "What's happened?" said Mrs. Landtrop. "Gosh," said Arthur, "Stanley's flat." "As a pancake," said Mr. Landtrop. "Darndest thing I've ever seen." "Let's all have breakfast," Mrs. Landtrop said. "Then Stanley and I will go and see Dr. Dan and hear what he has to say." She's quite a calm mother, isn't she, for a child that's just been flattened? The examination was almost over. "How do you feel?" Dr. Dan asked. "Does it hurt very much?" "I felt sort of tickly for a while after I got up," Stanley Landtrop said, "but I feel fine now." "Well, that's mostly how it is with these cases," said Dr. Dan. "We'll just have to keep an eye on this young fellow," he said when he had finished the examination. "Sometimes we doctors, despite all our years of training and experience, can only marvel at how little we really know." Mrs. Landtrop said she thought that Stanley's clothes would have to be altered by the tailor now, so Dr. Dan told his nurse to take Stanley's measurements. You know what a tailor is? It's somebody who makes clothes for people. Mrs. Lambchop wrote them down. Stanley was 4 feet tall, about a foot wide and half an inch thick. And that is how Stanley got flat. Right, there's only a short chapter for the first one, and we shall find out what happens to Flat Stanley and the adventures he can go on because he's flat. Where do you think he could go now he's flat? If you were flat, where would you go? Go and think. What could you do and where would you go? Oh, it'll be interesting to see what happens to him. I'll have a lovely weekend. Take care, Puffins.